This is Jessica.
And this is Lewis.
We have a preschooler and a toddler. Our children are a different kind of perfect. This is a show about surviving parenthood throughout raising children with special needs, while keeping ourselves and our sanity intact. This is FUBAR, Surviving Parenthood with Special Needs Kids. Hey everyone, just a heads up. So we're new podcasters and we're just learning our equipment, and we accidentally recorded this episode with our computer microphone instead of our actual professional microphone. So the sound quality is not quite as good. Please forgive us and we'll make sure to use the right microphone next time. Thanks. In this episode, we discuss our process for getting our kids assessed, the overwhelm we felt, and trying to keep Jessica from stroking out while waiting to get Benji tested. Welcome back to FUBAR, everyone. Today we're discussing getting a new diagnosis. First, I wanted to talk about Alex because his case was a little bit simpler and less involved than Benji's. So for Alex, once speech therapy said they thought something more was going on and they wanted us to see a developmental pediatrician, I didn't know what could possibly be going on. Given what I do, I knew that it could be something like a stroke or cerebral palsy or something else like an intellectual disability, but I didn't really know. So I took to the internet, which may or may not be the right thing to do, to see what could be the causes of his symptoms, what the symptoms were that could be something like cerebral palsy or something else, and what the treatments might be, just so I had an idea of what I was looking at. Lewis, what did you do when you heard for the first time that something might be going on with Alex?
I was very overwhelmed, to say the least, when I heard this. I remember at work kind of feeling very down and emotional, kind of not knowing where to direct my thoughts or feelings. Of course, I started using the internet as you did. I didn't really have any other source or anything to look into. So yeah, I used everything from like WebMD. Let me see what the diagnostic criteria is for cerebral palsy or some of these other conditions. It didn't really help. It mostly just made anxiety and everything worse. But when you're in a shadow like that, you're trying to just find some line of sight, or to try to make sense of things, and so that's what I did, better or worse.
It's really difficult when it's a baby and it's not something quite as visibly obvious like some sort of injury to a limb or the facial features of someone with like fetal alcohol syndrome or Down syndrome. If it's not visibly noticeable, then a person's brain goes in so many different directions. And I found that mine didn't really know where to go, and for all I knew, everything could be normal. So the experience trying to research what was going on for Alex was tough because there wasn't really much. There was research on cerebral palsy and Down syndrome, and that was about it. That really didn't help me. What I ended up doing was focusing on researching developmental milestones and when he should hit them, so I could focus on that versus something else, because at that point I really didn't know what to do or what was going on, and the internet was not giving me any information as to where to go with this. So what we ended up doing was, after the speech therapist said that she thought something more might be going on and we needed to get it evaluated, and I do realize that in the last episode our timeline wasn't quite clear for Alex, and to be honest, I don't exactly recall the timeline. There were so many things going on between Alex and Benji, and honestly we had just moved to where we're living a few months before, so we were still unpacking the house and we just had a baby. It was crazy. So I really can't recall the timeline in my head. So once we got the go-ahead to see the developmental pediatrician, we did see the developmental pediatrician, and she did some brief testing in her office, and once she said, okay, something actually might be going on, she called in a physical therapist and an occupational therapist. Because this is a pretty large, well-known children's hospital, and this was a pretty well-known developmental pediatrician, she had those people at her disposal in her office just to call in. So that was really nice that we were able to get those evaluations right away so we could get a better sense of where he was slowed down in his milestones and perhaps get a treatment plan going. The reason we went to those kinds of doctors is we just didn't know what else to do. He was very young. He was probably about 6 months old.
Yeah, no help to our pediatrician at the time.
Oh, yeah. Lewis, that's a really good point. So the pediatrician, and again, we'll get into this more in another episode, but again, we had just moved here a few months before, I think 3 or 4 months before I had Alex. And he was somebody that was in our insurance network. We had pretty limited insurance. I thought it was going to be great. It was through my job, but it really didn't cover many people. So he was one of very few pediatricians we could see. He had really good reviews. People had good things to say about him, but in retrospect, it wasn't so great. So we went to see him, and when we were telling him what was going on, even with the feeding issues, again, as you might have heard in past episodes, he said, oh, well, people have to be on the lower end of the growth curve. He'll be just fine. He wasn't just fine. We could not ignore it. And when I told him his milestones were not being met, he said, well, again, there's a range for everyone. It will be fine. He's meeting what I need him to meet. In the 3 questions he asked us, that was pretty much, is he still alive? And so we decided to bypass him because he wasn't concerned. And even after we got the diagnosis from the developmental pediatrician and the information from the physical therapist and the occupational therapist, he still kind of poo-pooed it and said, oh, well, I don't really believe that. I think he's fine. So that's why we ended up going outside of just our regular pediatrician, because he did not care and he did not have a clue what he was talking about. So I did trust the speech therapist because she had helped us to make sure that Alex was eating and he was putting on some weight. And again, the most important part was that he wasn't losing weight because he was very underweight at that point. So I trusted the speech therapist to go to this developmental pediatrician. We also did 3 developmental evaluations through a research study. Being that I'm a neuropsychologist, I love evaluations and I love testing, and being that we have 2 children with special needs, I like free things. So I figured this would be helpful for the researchers to do their study, and also it would help us to get these evaluations and keep tabs on Alex. So in addition to physical therapy and occupational therapy and the developmental pediatrician, we did 3 full developmental evaluations throughout the course of about 6 months so we could get an outside look on how things were going, and also keep tabs on his language and his cognition, since at the time that was appearing to be normal, but at 6 months, what really is there to see? So this was a way for me to feel a little bit better that we aren't potentially missing anything. There wasn't anything that was recommended that we chose not to do, so it was pretty straightforward, pretty simple for Alex, so we went through with it. And because we both work full-time, I was the one who went with him to his evaluations, so Lewis could help bring some money in while we were balancing all of these doctor's appointments. And I actually liked the experience of testing with Alex. I thought it was pretty interesting. They were doing evaluations that were in my field, but for little kids, and I'd never seen that done because I don't work with kids. I always work with adults, so it was actually pretty interesting for me.
He also didn't just have these developmental issues by themselves. He also had the tongue tie issue at birth, which created some feeding issues as well, right?
Yeah, that was a good point. We really, and I still don't know to this day, what was caused by the stroke and what was caused by tongue tie. The speech therapist believes that a lot of the developmental delays were caused by the tongue tie. However, the developmental pediatrician, the PT, and the OT disagreed with that. So, of course, we know the tongue tie had something to do with his feeding ability, but we really don't know how much. So that's a really good point.
Right, and they also, we weren't able to do any imaging because in his fragile state they would have to sedate him, and that, with how fragile he was at the time, would not be recommended, obviously, because that could potentially cause other issues.
Yeah, anesthesia is tough on anyone's body, especially a baby who is having feeding issues and possibly had a stroke. It's really not what we want to do. So with Alex, we were really lucky. Insurance covered everything, and all we had to pay was copays. So granted, it was about $40 out of pocket a couple times a week, but it wasn't terrible. And at that point, we were still trying to get Benji assessed, so it was really just Alex that we had to pay for. So $40 to $80 a week wasn't breaking the bank at the time. We were also lucky in that we got the diagnosis pretty much right away. The doctor told us right in the office this is what she thought was going on, so we didn't have to wait weeks or months to figure out what was happening, which was really a relief not to wait anymore and to know what was going on. Lewis, I came home and I told you that night, I believe, what developmental pediatrician had said about Alex. How did you feel right away when you heard that?
Like a ball of lead was dropped into my stomach. We were already having issues with Benji, and then this ball gets dropped. It's just so overwhelming. And he was our child and everything. You don't want anything bad to happen to him or have happened to them. And the fact that he was our rainbow baby also made it a little more sensitive too, because we worked so hard to get him here and everything. And it seemed like that there was a potential for it to be taken away, I guess. If that makes sense. So a lot to think about, obviously.
That's a really good point. We hadn't mentioned that yet, but we had tried for about 6 months to conceive with Alex, and then we were successful, and it ended up not working. I ended up having a ectopic pregnancy rupture while at work, and without getting into the specifics, it was very, very bad. I was eventually rushed to the hospital where they removed everything, but it was very much a near-death experience. And it actually took us several months after recovering from that experience and trying for many, many more months to conceive another child that we conceived Alex. So it was almost a year process that we were going through to try to have a second baby. We wanted this kid more than anything in the world, and to find out that something had happened and we didn't know why or what to do about it was heartbreaking. So Lewis, that's a really good point. I actually had a little bit of a different experience with my feelings the second I got the diagnosis. I had noticed the whole time I guess after we started seeing the speech therapist, that something was going on. And I felt so invalidated that no one was listening, and everyone kept saying, "Oh, you're just a worried mom. Oh, you're just a worried mom. It's fine." I knew it wasn't fine. Again, I work with folks who've had strokes day in and day out. I know what I'm seeing. I know that these symptoms I saw were not right. So when the doctor told me what she thought was happening, I actually felt really validated that someone listened to me and paid attention to my child and noticed what was happening instead of saying, he'll be fine. That he'll be fine is not helpful. He would have been a failure to thrive child. He wouldn't have made it. He still wouldn't probably even be sitting up had we not gotten him assessed and treated. So it was very, very validating. However, after that first thought, my second thought was it's really sad for him because he has a major difficulty and a really hard start in life, especially after being 5 weeks early and kind of thrust out of my body, seeing as I had really bad preeclampsia. And he has an aggressive older brother who is trying to hurt him all the time and who has a lot of extra needs. So it's kind of a double whammy for him and just so much going on. So Lewis, how did those feelings change after the initial kind of ball of lead in your belly? How did those feelings change over time?
Well, like anything with bad news like that, I mean, you have a period of, sense of, dread and anxiety, but you can't be overwhelmed too entirely by those. So eventually, you have to kind of push forward So I tried to think positive and, realize there was so little I knew, and one way or another we were going to do what we can to have him be as tip-top shape as possible. And even if, let's say, for some reason he was never able to walk or something, like let's say he did actually have cerebral palsy or something, I was fully ready to accept him as my child and everything, and love him, love the shit out of him. So didn't take away like that, like I thought he was like a failure or anything like that to me or anything like that. I was, just as happy. I just was saddened that he had to get such a bad hand dealt to him so early in life. It certainly could have been worse.
Let me tell you, that's one resilient kid. No matter what is thrown at him, he survives and he thrives. So he's kind of an inspiration for this podcast. My feelings did change a little bit. I have started to feel more and more sad for him because Benji requires so much more individualized attention, and there's so many more things going on with Benji. So I can't give Alex all the individualized attention, that I was able to give with Benji, seeing as he was an only child at that point. But also, there's so much going on with Benji that I just can't focus as much on Alex because it's more of a safety issue and an immediate issue. So I really struggle with that because I can't give him all the attention that he deserves and that he wants and that he should get, especially since he does have to go to school. And I also feel guilty because he's in physical therapy and occupational therapy, and there's not enough time in the day. I work full-time, Lewis works full-time. We come home, it's 5 o'clock, we need to do food, bath, get ready for bed, and then when are we having time to do home exercises for physical therapy and occupational therapy? Things don't get better very quickly, if at all, if you just go to PT and OT once a week and that's it, and you don't do anything at home. But there wasn't any time. And how do I balance doing therapies versus playtime versus feeding the child, which was really important. So I felt really sad and really guilty that I wasn't giving him everything I thought he needed or thought he should get. And I also felt really sad that I didn't know what his outcome could be. It could be anything from spectacular or really, really bad. And I didn't know, and I still don't know. And I'm feeling more positive about it nowadays because he is starting to walk. He is seeming to get better. So I feel more positive that he will have a good outcome. But it's still really up in the air, and I still don't know. The other issue I was having was, from a very early age, I was comparing him to all the other kids. I don't know why, but I seem to have this inferiority complex of, oh, well, my kid needs to be first, my kid needs to be able to do X, Y, and Z, and he wasn't. And the other kids were doing it faster. They were sitting up faster, they were rolling over faster, and he wasn't. I was really struggling with that, especially like, well, why isn't he doing those things? But in a way, getting this diagnosis was helpful because it gave me a reason that, okay, that's why he's not doing these things yet. I don't have to compare him. He's not a failure. He had a stroke. So I don't have to compare him anymore. He's going to progress in his own time. He's going to be perfect in his own way. He doesn't have to... It's okay if he doesn't follow that timeline.
I really understand what you're saying there.
So, Lewis, big question. And you'll see why in a minute.
Oh, great.
So, did you have time to grieve the diagnosis of Alex? And if so, what was that like for you?
Grieve, huh? Well, yeah, I'm not really sure. I don't know. It seemed like with all the one thing after another with like crazy stuff happening, it was kind of like part of me wasn't terribly surprised. The depressing that sounds, it was kind of like, oh, great, something terrible again. Oh well. Hard to describe. I don't know if it was just a way of like me trying to cope with the news, but I mean, sometimes I kind of just space out when stuff like that happens, and I'm just kind of like, we'll see what happens. But in some ways, I try to use it in a way to be positive. Yeah, I don't really know how to answer that with grieving.
Well, I do for me. I did not have time to grieve. I think, if I recall correctly, and this was like 9 months ago, I might have grieved for like a half an hour on the way home that day, but there was really no time.
I mean, I do remember, I think it was a little bit after hearing about the diagnosis and everything. I remember driving home one day and almost having to pull over on the side of the road because I got suddenly welled up with emotion about the situation for Alex, and I just started crying. I was very upset and just kind of needed to let it out. So I do remember that. As much as the grieving, I can remember driving home the little time I had.
Yeah, that was the same experience for me. There just wasn't time. We still had to get him into therapies. He still had to eat and get bathed and go to sleep, and Benji still had to get the testing done that he needed and all of his therapies. And again, we had just moved into a new place in a new state. We're getting used to schools and everything there, and Lewis and I were getting used to new jobs. There just wasn't really time, and it really bothers me that I haven't had time to grieve. And I hadn't even had time to grieve the loss of the ectopic pregnancy and the fact that I was close to death. There just wasn't time. And so we just pushed it down and moved along and just kind of did the next thing. And I'm hoping at some point I actually have time to grieve and feel what I feel, or feel what I may feel about the fact that he had a stroke, but thus far there hasn't been time. So Lewis, in the minimal time that you had to feel your feelings, did you have anyone other than me to go through this experience with you? Anyone to support you through it?
Really just my family, like my mom and dad. At least they were there to be able to listen and everything, even if they didn't exactly go through the situation. But my brother was overseas at the time, so I didn't get really a chance to talk to him. I didn't really talk to my sister in a while, so really it was like my mom and dad would probably be really the only ones I had. I haven't really had a whole lot of interactions with my dude friends, from growing up. I haven't had really much interaction with them for a long time.
Yeah, I really didn't have much. I was able to talk with Lewis about some things, but there really wasn't even that much time for that. I was so wrapped up in getting therapies set up for him and for Benji and getting the right schools for the kids, because where they were going just wasn't it. A side note for Alex, he was going to a daycare that was on campus where I was working, which originally sounded great, and the people were really nice and they seemed to really love him, but he wasn't getting any stimulation there. Every time I went to pick him up, he was laying on the floor on his back staring up to the ceiling, wasn't playing with anything, wasn't doing anything. And maybe for another kid that would be fine enough, but for him, who was already having all these delays, he needed more stimulation. So I knew I had to pull him and send him somewhere else. And that was around the same time that Benji was having trouble at school, and we had to pull him from that school and find another school for him. So we were so busy with that, and also doing the home exercises, finding funding, because good Lord, this is frickin' expensive. We were trying to make sure that we're actually going to our full-time jobs full-time, but it's impossible when the therapies, the testing, the everything is between the hours of 9 and 5. So how do you do that? We can't multiply ourselves, and other people weren't very available because my parents were working and everyone else lived far away. We didn't have many choices. And these things are really freaking expensive. It was just awful. We had to make sure to feed the kids. And by the way, I was trying to pump. I knew that after a while, Alex wasn't going to really be able to nurse, and it just took so much energy that I really just eventually gave up. But I did want to pump. So I was pumping every 2 to 3 hours throughout the day and night, wasn't sleeping. And I mean, it really just took over my life. So eventually at 6 months, I had to stop because it was taking away from the precious little time that I had for these children, and it was either pump or spend time with the children. So I chose that. Luckily, I had a good store of milk, so I was able to give him that till about 10 months, but still. So I didn't have the time to talk about it with Lewis or to go through it with him, or even ask him, what are you experiencing? So some of what he's saying is a little bit new to me because we just never had time to talk about it. And really, I just kept having my weekly mini nervous breakdowns where I would just freak out and feel overwhelmed and feel like I wasn't able to function because I didn't have time to cope with it. I didn't have time to grieve, and I didn't have anyone to talk to. So, question for you. Do you, Lewis, ever think about anything other than our children and their special needs? Because I certainly don't.
Do I think about anything else? Sure, or at least I tried to. It was much worse, I would say, several months ago, when everything was fresh. This was all new routine, trying to get everything down. But for me, it feels like the routine is becoming familiar enough that we can, because I need to try to escape sometimes, with all that's going on. So sometimes it's listening to podcasts or music or watching some videos, whether it's like a PBS video about dinosaurs or like something funny on YouTube. That's really what did to try to just do some kind of self-care, even though, ideally things like exercise would have been lovely and everything, but yeah, that's kind of a joke, because right now, like, how are you going to get time for that? But
you mean attempt to stay healthy? That's a thing?
Right. Well, also, and the fact, they say it's actually really good for, reducing anxiety and depression symptoms and stuff like that, but again, it's always like you need to actually have time, and if you're both working parents and you have special needs kids, there's only 24 hours in a day, and you need to remain in a semi-comatose state for at least 8 hours a night, so called sleeping,
which we're still not getting,
right?
15 months in.
So good luck trying to get any kind of exercise. Let's just say that. So yeah, really, it's just kind of like lying in bed and listening to videos, or at work, putting something on and listening to that while I'm on the computer. Whatever I can get really was what I was doing.
Yeah, I really struggled with thinking about, and to this day I still struggle. I struggled with thinking about anything other than that. I've become a boring person. That's all I talk about. That's all I think about. That's what I research. And it's kind of sucky. Lewis made a good point of listening to podcasts. I have a fairly decent commute to work and back, and to also pick up the kids, because that's in a totally opposite direction. So I started listening to podcasts as well, really for support and to hear what other people are going through, and to hear other essentially kind of hot mess moms, much like myself. I'm not a prim and proper perfect mom, and I will never be, and I don't aspire to be. I fully embrace the hot mess mom persona. So it was really helpful to listen to those kinds of other mommy podcasts and to be on some other mommy Facebook groups. However, it started to really bug me, because they were not having the same kind of problems as I was. They were not having the same kind of stresses. It was so frustrating. It started to feel to me like they were whining about the most basic things, and I'm like, I can't really relate anymore. I can't relate. I have so many therapies and this, and my kids won't eat, and my kids won't sleep, and my kids aren't developing, and my kids are about to get kicked out of school. Like, it just never ended. So I couldn't really relate anymore. And that was the big push for me to start this podcast, because if I can't relate, and then other people can't relate as well, and there needs to be somewhere for other parents to find someone who is going through something similar to what they're going through. It was really helpful to listen to those podcasts, but it wasn't helpful enough. And that's really what I do right now to cope, just like Lewis said, is I listen to podcasts, and I alternate between that and some other comedy podcasts to try to get through, but that's really all I had time for. Alright, so now on to Benji. So what did I do for research to find out who to go to? Since the school is mentioning possible autism, I took to the internet for looking into autism, which I'm not quite sure how helpful that was, because if you research autism, you'll get 875 bazillion hits. Some will be legitimate, some will be helpful, a lot of them will be quackery. But it was helpful for me to see mostly what the symptoms were, so I could see if I thought for myself, does he actually seem to fit for autism or does he not, and to get a sense of what the treatment might be like. Since I also work in the field of psychology, I did have some friends who work with kids that I could just ask a little bit of information to, so I could get a little bit more information, but I really had to limit my research because that could drive a person completely insane. Lewis, what about you? What kind of research did you do?
Like most people, I really just, relied on videos, internet, even things like WebMD, and so trying to get an understanding of what typical autistic symptoms are, because I really don't have any background in that, and never had to really think about it or deal with it. So I was kind of like surprised when people were even mentioning the suggestion of him being potentially autistic at the time. I'm like, I don't know, maybe he's okay. Or obviously, as he was approaching the age of 3, then it became much more for being noticeable. And certainly going on YouTube and seeing the other people's children or other videos that were as legit I could find as possible, and I can kind of see some of the patterns that I saw in them with him. So it kind of lead me in that direction. I'm like, okay, so there is some overlapping patterns. Now it's not 100% guarantee that means he was autistic, but I could see what they were talking about, and then I can kind of look on my own time and see how he reacted to certain things, and kind of go from there. But that's what I did, looking at videos, reading articles, try to understand whatever I can.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I did. The videos were helpful because reading the symptoms made me think, well, he could have autism, he might not. And also there's some overlap between what is typical and what is atypical, so I just couldn't figure it out. I found the research experience very frustrating and completely overwhelming because, like I said, there's so much out there, and I couldn't figure out what was legit, what was quackery, what was the right thing to do, who was the right person to go to, what was the right treatment. There was just so much, and it was just so overwhelming. We ended up going to a psychologist to get a diagnosis that's more standard. Sometimes you can go to a pediatrician or a developmental pediatrician, but we ended up going for testing with a psychologist. He was a little bit over 3 at that point. And we'd wanted to get him tested a little bit before, but as you heard in the last couple episodes, it took a really long time to get him in, and actually way shorter than most people's experience, especially where we're living. We went to that kind of doctor. We went to a psychologist because, given what I do, it seemed like that was really the gold standard. They had all of the most gold standard appropriate tests, like the ADOS and some other things, and I felt that it would be the most accurate diagnosis, and I trusted it, and I'd known about that test for a long time, so I decided to do that. So when we went to get him tested, of course we did testing for autism, but we also did some cognitive testing where they look at things like memory, attention, language, visual skills, those kinds of things, so we could rule out anything else that could be going on at the time. And also just to see where he was, because kids change a lot as they get older, so we wanted to see what were his strengths, what were his weaknesses, so we could help to boost those weaknesses and really strengthen those strengths so that they can kind of balance out those weaknesses. We did later get evaluations for physical therapy and occupational therapy because I was noticing delays and sensory processing issues, but that did come several months after we did the psychological testing. The one thing we chose not to do was to get a developmental pediatrician. For some reason, and this really surprised me, it took way longer to get an appointment with a developmental pediatrician than it did to get the testing for autism. It was at least a year wait. So I put my name on 3 different lists because, being who I am and being the persistent person that I am, I called everywhere and put my name on everything. And there was one who eventually said they couldn't see me. One person I went to, and it turned out it was not a developmental pediatrician, it was actually a psychologist, and they would just get to know him for a session and then see if he needed a developmental pediatrician. And there was no way for me to have known that. So I took all this time off of work to take him for something we'd already done at that point, and there was no information saying this was with a psychologist until I got to the appointment, and then they didn't even have anything available at all with a developmental pediatrician. And then by the time we could have seen a developmental pediatrician, it was 2 months ago, and we'd long since had this diagnosis, and I called and said, okay, well, we have this appointment, we've already gotten him in therapies, we've already gotten him tested, we're already getting ABA therapy, is there even anything that you can do? Is there any reason to even bother to see you guys? And they said, no, actually, you're already doing everything that we would recommend, so let's go ahead and cancel that. So there wasn't even any point. One of the hardest things about this was the cost. Some people's insurance does cover this kind of testing, and I don't really know if ours does or did, but we couldn't find many places that would take insurance. A lot of people wanted to do it out of pocket, which we didn't have. A lot of people were charging $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 to do this testing, which we didn't have, and especially with a new baby. And the places that would take insurance had an insane wait list that we still haven't gotten the call back for. So the place that we ended up going, it cost about $1,000 out of pocket to get the testing, and we were lucky that we eventually got reimbursed through our FSA, which means we still actually paid for it out of pocket, but fewer taxes. Still $1,000. So it was really, really expensive. Because I'm a pushy, persistent, annoying person who wouldn't stop hounding them, it only took about 2-3 weeks to find out what the actual diagnosis was, because I kept calling and calling and calling and calling and asking and asking and asking and wouldn't let it go. So in a way, it was faster. It was also slower than it could have been for another child because he was a tricky case. As Lewis said, he did start to show more signs slightly after he turned 3. So at the time he got evaluated, it was subtle that he had autism. He was right on the border, and they actually needed to have a consensus meeting for him to see if he had autism. If he went for testing today, he absolutely would be diagnosed with autism right off the bat. And actually, a couple months after we got him originally tested, we did, through a research study, a backup evaluation with the ADOS to see what was going on, and they did notice right away that he did meet criteria for autism. So it took a little bit longer to get that diagnosis than it could have, but it was actually faster because I would not let up. Lewis, how did you feel the second you got the diagnosis that Benji had autism?
Lots of relief, to say the least. Mostly just because all that stuff was like all up in the air, like where to go, like, you know, there was no strategy in place, everything. Once we got a diagnosis, there are goals. You know, we were able to create a strategy. We're like, okay, now we know this is what we got to deal with. What's next? And there, in that regard, there was some relief because of that. We were, you know, able to create those goals and etc. It's going to be rough, but we knew that knowledge felt, say, empowering, but like felt reassuring.
I agree. I felt very relieved once we got the diagnosis. Part of that was selfish because I was relieved that it wasn't poor parenting that had caused the issues. I had a friend who said that she didn't think it was autism, she just thought we were doing a poor job of parenting, which really didn't make me feel so great, and it really hurt because I was trying everything I could to make a good life for him and to help him. And you know, I had a leg up as a parent. I have training in psychology, and I was using all of those tips and nothing was working, and his behaviors were getting worse, and so I was worried, but maybe I am doing something wrong. Maybe I just really suck as a parent. And it was relieving to find out that it wasn't me, it was a brain issue, it was autism, and that, okay, we can work on this. It's not me just sucking as a person. I also felt really sad for him because I did know people who had autism growing up, especially the high-functioning autism, and they really had a hard time socially. And I was sad for him that I didn't know what life would be like, and I didn't know, will he have friends? Will he keep friends? Will he be happy? Will he find a job? Will he have a relationship? Will he have kids of his own if he chooses to? And so really sad that I just didn't know, and that things may not work out for him as I'd always dreamed they would. Lewis, after you had some time to process, did your feelings change about hearing that diagnosis?
Well, I mean, it was still, you know, overwhelming and everything with the different therapies and everything. So it's, you know, it was hard to, such a rush at that time, getting into the new routines with the gajillion therapies that we had and the different schedules we had to kind of arrange and stuff. My job, it wasn't a whole lot of time, I guess, to really process it per se. It's just really, I just wanted the best life for him as possible. And that's really all I could ask for. And I just was really just hoping to myself that I still hope he doesn't become like an outcast or something. And I tried to be as compassionate as I could with him, understanding that there's brain issues going on, obviously, that are making it this much difficult. And it's difficult when you feel so angry at them for something, but at the same time that it's really not their fault, and it's difficult then to direct that energy or negate it, that feeling. Otherwise you kind of throw it back on yourself. Yeah, lots of different emotions and everything.
Agreed. Yeah, I still feel relieved. No, not necessarily that he has autism. I don't want him to have autism, but I'm relieved that I know what's going on and that we can move on and do the next right thing for him. I really didn't give myself a chance to feel anything else because, like Lewis said, I was so gung-ho into getting him into therapies that I just didn't myself time to feel anything. I did start to feel sad for him because he was having trouble in school with doing all the other things the other 3-year-olds were doing. He was the only kid who wasn't potty trained. He was falling behind the other kids socially and emotionally and was starting to have a lot of meltdowns at school. And he finally found friends, and I didn't want him to lose those friends. And so I was just really sad knowing that I can't control that. But I was relieved that he was finally able to get the help that he needed to be the kid he was meant to be, whatever that is. Just to give you a sense of what our schedule is, with Alex, he has physical therapy twice a week and occupational therapy once a week. Benji has physical therapy once a week and occupational therapy twice a week, 29 hours a week of applied behavioral analysis, or ABA. He has 1 extra session in school of occupational therapy, and then 2 hours a week of special training of social skills, or I'm not really sure exactly what it is because my brain has fallen out of my head, but he has that through early intervention at school. So it is completely crazy, and that's just the therapies. That's not anything else in life. It's been nuts, so there's just no time to think. There really wasn't even a time to grieve. Life was just so stressful and so busy. I barely even had time to go to the bathroom. At that point, I believe I was still pumping. And it was just crazy. Half the time when I tried to go to the bathroom, I had at least one child on my lap, possibly the other one hanging off of me and wanting to play. And there wasn't even time to eat. There were days that I skipped meals or days that I had to eat while I was in the bathroom because there just wasn't time. So time to grieve, there wasn't any of. Lewis, did you have any time to grieve?
Well, like the same thing I said with Alex. Yeah, not a whole lot of time to really grieve per se. Really, it's just kind of like, oh gosh, okay, what do I think about now? What do I do to get what he needs? It's just no time to really, unfortunately, consider, really think about that and how you're feeling. It's a whirlwind, just so much.
Do you have anyone else other than myself to go through this experience with? And if so, what was that like for you?
Again, like what I said with Alex, really it's just all I got is my folks, and talking to them could help sometimes, but I know they didn't exactly go through everything I went through. So really I just relied on whatever sympathy my folks could give me, and kind of vent every now and then, but that's that's really all I got.
Yeah, it was really hard. People were a little bit more compassionate when they found out about Alex than they were with Benji. People were really minimizing, they were really invalidating, and the nicest thing they would say is, oh, well, I have kids, I know how hard it is, they'll be fine. Especially parents of children who don't have special needs. They're like, oh, don't worry about it, it'll be great. I also got a lot of, I'm hyperbolizing, making a mountain out of a molehill, things weren't so bad at home. And it's like, excuse me, you're not at home getting beaten up all day, every day, things thrown, kids not eat. Like, it's really, I'm not hyperbolizing. It's really just as hard as I'm saying it is. Don't minimize what's going home when you're not there. People were telling me it could be worse, don't worry about it. Are we sure the doctors are right? Because a lot of the people didn't believe that he had that diagnosis or didn't believe in that diagnosis. And I did get a lot of, are you sure they really need those therapies? You're really busy. You don't have a lot of money. Are you sure you need those therapies? Maybe you can just do it at home. It'll be fine. Okay. If a doctor or someone who has all the training and all the credentials in these things are saying he needs this, I'm going to go with that. If the ABA people, again, applied behavioral analysis people, said he needs 29 hours a week of therapy, we're going to do that. If they said, oh, he needs 1 hour, I would say, maybe we can do this on our own. We got that. But 29 hours a week is pretty significant. A lot of kids, even who are not high functioning, don't get that much. So if they're saying it, we're going to do it because he actually needs it. Don't tell me, you who have no experience with children who have special needs and no training, know better than these doctors or than these professionals. Don't give me that. I also heard that if we were better parents, it would be fine. We just don't know what we're doing, or we're just doing the wrong thing. I was just angry, and I still am. I'm still getting this stuff in. It's been 6 or 7 months since we got the diagnosis, maybe, and I'm just angry all the time. Everyone makes me irritable. I don't want to be around people. I just want to be a hermit, because people don't get it. They don't get it. They're so invalidating and just saying everything we do is wrong, and I just feel like I can't win. And I've just had it. I've had it. As I said before, I really don't think about anything other than these special needs, and I am probably isolating myself. When I talk to other people, I don't have a big social network. My friends who have kids, I only have a couple who get it and who are going through something similar. So I don't have a lot of people to talk to about these things, so I just talk about it anyway and just ignore the social cues to change the subject and just do it anyway. So, Lewis, what have you done or are doing to cope with the diagnosis of autism in Benji and to cope with the difficulties that we're having on a daily basis?
Well, in order to try to cope, it's a lot of internal stuff that you have to really do, because as a person, people trying to be in control of everything, situation, and every aspect of their lives, and something like this is obviously beyond your control, and trying to, over the months, internally work that out to try to be okay with the fact that so many of these things we really weren't in control of, per se. We were obviously trying to maintain some kind of control in the sense of like guiding him and everything, but it's really just trying to find that kind of acceptance, really, because to me it seemed like there's no other way around it. Like, there just has to be some kind of like surrendering and acceptance to the situation and kind of going with the flow, in a sense, as difficult as that is. Not saying it doesn't cause me any emotional stress or anything, but really that's the only way I can kind of see it, and try not to internalize it in a negative way too much, and just kind of be like, this is we got, doesn't necessarily have to be a reason for this or anything. This is just how it is. How can we make this work? And I mean, that's how I'm trying to at least look at it now, and it's taken time to be okay with that. And I mean, there were moments, obviously plenty of moments, where the boy is acting up significantly, and I just about to lose it myself, or get furious. I've gotten better, I know, over the months, but just sometimes you just like walk out of the house and you just want to scream. It's just so frustrating, especially because you're trying to communicate with him like what he's doing incorrectly, or try to suggest a better thing to do, and not smack people or do this and that. And again, because of the communication issue that's a part of the autistic spectrum disorders, he doesn't get it often. I mean, hopefully that improves better with the therapies and just natural maturation, but trying to work on that is really the best thing I've been trying to do.
Yeah, I don't cope well. I've been having my weekly mini nervous breakdowns, like I mentioned earlier, where I just can't cope with anything and feel like I'm just going to explode out of my skin. I did start psychotherapy, but given the crazy schedule and, again, working full-time and trying to keep these kids alive between myself and Lewis, I don't have enough time. I'm seeing my therapist every 2 to 3 weeks at most, which is not enough time. Not often enough. And I also have a life coach who I talk to on the phone a half hour every week, which has been really helpful because at least that's consistent. I've just been way inconsistent with the other coping strategies. There isn't enough time, there isn't enough money, I don't feel well enough, whatever it is. So as we mentioned earlier, I listen to a lot of podcasts. There's also a game on my phone that I play. I love to read, but I don't have the attention span anymore to read anything more than maybe a magazine article. Sometimes I get to take a bath, but the way our house is situated, the bathtub is right across from the boys' rooms, and there is no soundproofing in this house, so everybody hears everything. And if I turn on that bath, everyone's up for the rest of the night, so I don't get that often. And that's really about it. So, to sum up, it's just been really, really hard. We did everything that was recommended to us to do for the kids as far as getting the evaluations. The internet was somewhat helpful in giving us a direction, but also added to our anxiety. And, it was really time consuming, really expensive, especially for Benji, and our emotions have just been all over the place, and we haven't had time to really process. So, at this point, it is what it is, and hopefully at some point before retirement, we'll have time to actually process our feelings, and I don't know.
And now it's time for fails, nails, and comical tales.
All right. So, Lewis, do you want to start with your fail for this week?
Well, I was with the kids the other day, and we were outside having fun with Benji and Alex. I was trying to make some potting mix from scratch. Some peat moss, some sand, some perlite. I was showing Benji how to do that, and of course Alex was there too. And I had the garden hose on because I was obviously using some water to help mix up the potting mix, and Benji decided to go pick it up and take a look at it, and apparently he knew how to open up the valve, and he happened to be pointing it directly at me and Alex, and sprayed us real good with it. And he just started spraying us, and he just realized he lost control of the situation, dropped the hose, and just kind of stood back, and then just was like, I'm sorry.
My fail was forgetting show and tell the very first week of school. To be fair, the school gives us information not really by email, but by this app on our phone called Story Park, which they just started using this year. And they send all the pictures and the videos and everything through that, and they send 15 a day. So after the first day or two of school, I just looked at the pictures and stopped reading the words, and ended up missing that they're actually going to have show and tell this year. And just missed it. And luckily he had something in his backpack, but I had no clue till I got the picture later on that there was even show and tell, that was even a thing. What about your nail, Lewis?
So we had a part of a tree fall down several months ago, and luckily it didn't do too much damage to the house we're in, but it sure scared the drunkers out of Benji. So he, for a while, was afraid to go outside in the backyard or anything near that tree. And it took some time, but I feel like I nailed it, helping with getting rid of the fear, because I remember us driving in the car and starting to talk about trees. And he's like, are they gonna fall, and stuff like that. And I started to try to tell him about the positive things about trees and why so many good qualities about them, and not just so he just had the one aspect that sometimes they fall down, and unfortunately sometimes they land on houses. But the show what are all the several more positive aspects of them? It seemed like he really kind of got excited in the conversation about it. He's like, oh, so I feel like I nailed that.
Mine's kind of weird. I bought Benji a toy skeleton. So, to be fair, This kid loves the body. He, several months ago, took a string cheese and made a spinal cord out of it. So he knows body parts, he loves the body, and I thought he would like to see a skeleton with all the bones. So it's around Halloween time, and they had one for like $3 at the store. So I got it for him, and he lost his mind with excitement. He was so happy and did high fives with it and made it his friend, and just he slept with it, or sometimes he hung it on his closet door because it was going to protect him from the shadows at night that he's scared of. He takes this thing with him everywhere, and he loves his toy skeleton. Granted, the head popped off after a couple days and we had to glue it back on, and so now he tells everyone, we glued his head on. But he loves the skeleton. Loves it. It was one of the best $3 that I've ever spent. All right, what's your comical tale for this week?
Well, I guess besides the hose incident, it would be with Alex. The other day was really cute. So he had been hanging out with me, and I was doing my several times daily sweeping of the floor through the house. Kids are pretty messy. And it was just, I thought it was really cute. And he came up and he saw where the broom was and kind of grabbed it, and while crawling he was going around like sweeping the floor, and it looked like he was really trying to like get stuff and everything and help me out. So it was a cute, funny kind of incident. You know, I love that he was trying to imitate me in that regard.
So my comical tale is a little different. So we were at a like safari park with the kids, and Benji and I were walking down the hill, and there was this family next to us speaking Spanish. And I was looking at Benji, and he was starting to get so frustrated because he likes to talk to people and he didn't know how to interact with them. So he looked at them, and all of a sudden he just started screaming La Bamba at the top of his lungs. He just lost it and started singing La Bamba because he wanted to participate in their conversation. And then after he stopped singing, he looked at them and he's like, have you ever heard the song La Bamba? And I just lost it laughing. It was absolutely one of the most hilarious things I've ever seen. This little kid just trying so hard and just not knowing how to interact with people who were speaking a different language. But he did the best he could. It was really sweet.
Now it's time for us to share a self-care hack of the week, where we share what helped us survive. Okay, Lewis, tell me, what self-care tool got you through this week?
All right, Lewis, tell us about your self-care strategy for the week.
Well, I guess kind of like what I was saying kind of a little bit earlier. Basically, I've been trying to tell myself when I feel, angry, something like that. There's many reasons why I might feel angry during the day, and trying to look at myself and kind of ask myself, why am I upset? Is this something that I really need to be upset about? Why? Kind of trying to dispel the sense of ego that likes to feed on these emotions and get upset about things, and to try to be able to not be as offended per se or angry about something, and just kind of be able to feel, let it go, and not feed into the situation and make it worse. And
my self-care strategy was using those aromatherapy bath salts to go in the bath. One thing that we'll talk about probably way down the road, I have a chronic pain syndrome, so I'm in pain all the time, which really doesn't add a lot of help to the situation. But Epsom salts tend to help my muscles a little bit, and using things that either have eucalyptus or lavender or something like that smell good, it's really relaxing. So whenever I do get the chance to take a bath, I put in those aromatherapy bath salts and soak in the bath for, even if it's just 5 minutes. And it makes me feel really good, and I really like that. So that's what I've been doing as much as I can. Thanks so much for joining us today. We would love your feedback on the show, and would love to know what topic you would like to hear about in the future.
Well, that's it for our show. To find out more about the show, please go to www.fubarpod.com. Check us out on Facebook with our FUBAR Surviving Parenthood with Special Needs Kids group, and on Twitter @FUBARPod. If you like our show, please click on subscribe, and help us out by giving us 5 stars on iTunes or wherever you find our podcasts. and leave us a review so other like-minded parents can find out what you like about us and discover their community in which to survive and thrive. See you next time on FUBAR, Surviving Parenthood with Special Needs Kids.